Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes. I get to be the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy. And so we're here sometimes multiple times a week to interview great sales leaders and make sure that we can actually increase the performance of salespeople's pipelines and the results of their teams. Now, we get to interview some of the top minds in sales on this show. We get to interview speakers, authors, consultants, sales trainers, and people that have actually been out there managing sales teams. So every single week, the goal that we have here is we are going to definitely build a sales system with our guest that you can use no matter the size of your team or the size of your goals to be able to immediately implement after the show. And it is my pleasure this week to be able to welcome a good friend of mine, Mr. Paul Reilly. Paul, welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, Sean, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me on the show. Looking forward to it.
100%, man. Now, Paul and I know each other through the National Speakers Association, but Paul actually has a really interesting background. And I know that we met when I was speaking at an event, you were speaking at an event, and we just got to hang out in the back of the room like speakers sometimes do and just talk sales. So tell us a little bit about your background, what you shared with me, and the fact that you've been in sales, I think, your entire life, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty cool thing. So share with us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. I got to tell the audience, though, I had the unfortunate privilege of following you on stage, which is never an easy thing to do. I mean, I was trying to prepare for my presentation a little bit, and I was listening to some of your stories, and I think it was a program on how to pivot, and I was just entrenched in the story. It was unbelievable. But my very first sales job right out of college was actually selling propane. So that's my first professional sales job. But prior to that, I had a painting company in college where I had to sell painting programs. I sold car washes for a while for a local car wash company here when I was in high school, and I sold jewelry for a while. But then I got into the construction industry, where I sold quite a bit for new projects, new hospitals, oil and gas projects. So a pretty diverse background in sales. But yeah, I mean, ever since the age of 16, I was out there selling, and still am today.
And tell us about the work that you're doing now, because you take a very interesting approach to helping sales teams, and it's not so much around the science of sales. I know that numbers are very important for what you do, but when you and I have had conversations, I'm the guy that's diving into like numbers, systems, operations, and you take a slightly different tack. So tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our company has one mission, and that is to help salespeople go out there and compete more profitably by selling on value and not price. And how we help organizations do that is through the value-added selling message. And this message has been around, gosh, since the late 1980s. We're now in the 4th edition of the book. And it's interesting because it's built upon a bedrock philosophy, and that is, for salespeople, we need to go out there, do more of those things that add value and less of those things that add little or no value. So we want to make sure we're always looking for ways to add value. And one of the new ways we're doing that as well in our organization to help you sell more profitably is a new book we got coming out, Selling Through Tough Times. And this is still very much aligned with value-added selling and the philosophy, but it's given it a slightly different twist based on the current environment.
And I hear a lot about value in the sales world. I mean, I speak about that a lot in our book, Bulletproof Selling, but it's always interested to interview the minds that I know in sales like yours, because value looks a lot of different ways, and it's probably been defined a lot of different ways too. So how do you define value as it applies to the world of sales? I'm a salesperson trying to figure out, with every piece of communication, I'm being told by guys like Sean and guys like Paul, I have to be delivering value, even if I can't make the same. So what is value?
That's an interesting concept, because I can't tell you what value is to your customers. Neither, that's the same way you couldn't to your salespeople, to their customers, because value is defined by the person, by the individual. So, you take a software salesperson, and he or she is trying to figure out, okay, how does my customer define value? They're not going to be able to completely figure it out unless they ask that customer what's important to them, what outcomes are they looking for. So when you think about value, it's deeply personal, meaning each one of us has a different definition of value. That's what makes it such an interesting concept, because what one customer values over here, the other customer, they couldn't care any less about it. So it's really dependent upon the individual.
So if value is so critical, and I know you believe it is, or you wouldn't have, had all these books out around the value-based sale. If it's so critical, where do salespeople hope a little more than they should in making sure that they are defining value for their customer and providing it throughout the sales cycle? Because it's not just about as soon as I make the sale, I start providing value. I know you're a firm believer that we should be doing that long before the sale is made. So where do you see salespeople hoping that they'll stumble across something of value to be able to provide during the sales cycle?
What's interesting, I think many of them hope in the sense that they think they have an idea of how customers define value. They hope that they can bring value at the moment that they need to bring value. And I think a failure to plan is a big part of it. And I know that's something that you have mentioned so much on this show and in Bulletproof Selling, how hope is not a strategy. You're absolutely right. So many salespeople just fail to plan. In fact, our internal research shows that only about 10% of the general sales population routinely plans every single sales call that they go on. And now let's contrast that with what top achieving salespeople do, which we did a separate study to identify their habits. 95% of them routinely plan every single call. So I think it's just a matter of taking a few minutes, putting pen to paper, and just identifying objectives, what questions you want to ask. And not only that, but I think the other challenge is as salespeople, sometimes we focus too much on ourselves and not the customer. And it's easy to do that, right? Because we have quotas to hit. We have a boss that we got to report to. We have all this pressure on us to make things happen. So naturally, we're going to focus on ourselves. But what's interesting is top achievers, they're able to step outside of themselves as well. They put away that pressure and they focus purely on their customer. It's not about making a deal for their company. It's about making a difference in the customer's business. And they embrace that. It's hard to do though, especially when we go through tough times, So yeah.
And I'm always interested to hear this then, because a lot of salespeople are held to such high quotas now. And in an environment where I used to be able to get on a plane or just go door to door in my town and get to meet people in person. Now, some people are into that. Some people are not. So I've got this hybrid environment that I'm in now. Well, if I'm so numbers driven, and a lot of salespeople are, how are you going to convince leaders of sales organizations that we should be placing more focus on value? I mean, they understand it, but it's just like, we need a better business culture. Well, that's great. But I know for a fact that often slides to like number 89th in the list of priorities. So why is value so important that I take it from wherever it currently is in the stack and place it closer to the top?
If what's interesting on this, all right, I did some research just for my own perspective the other day. I know you're a numbers guy, so you will appreciate this. So I took a look at some of our Fortune 500 clients who are traded on the stock exchange, and I looked at how they performed compared to the S&P 500. And I'm making a pretty big assumption here. I'm going to say that the companies we partner with are value-added organizations through and through, all right? And what I found is that those companies focused on delivering value that put customers first, they outperform the S&P 500 on average. I don't have the exact number. It's not overly scientific, but as a leader, what I'm thinking is, okay, if I can put value at the top of our list in creating value, viewing the world through the eye of the customer, seeing how they see and create solutions, create a culture around that, how could that not perform well in the long term? All right. And I think that's got to be the focus is in a leadership position where you're more or less going to be responsible for either safeguarding or creating the culture you want to create. You've got to look at how your mission, what your company is doing, if it truly is customer focused in that sense. And the more you focus on the customer, everything else tends to take care of itself. But making that decision, it's not as tangible as saying, okay, let's increase our revenue by X amount. Let's do this. It's a little more obscure, I guess. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say that, but it's hard to go to Wall Street with that sometime, maybe, or to your board of directors.
In a lot of the planning then that I saw these high performing teams do, Marine Corps, Green Berets, Navy SEALs that I was able to embed with, it really fascinated me that they spent easily 80% of their time in the planning stages of their missions. and maybe 20% executing. And planning didn't just look like we're all going to sit in a room like in an executive suite and whiteboard this and hope everybody remembered. They do that, and then they would do the things they need to do to plan for the mission, often to the point of setting up to the exact specifications, the houses they were going to have to go into or the compounds they were going to clear. They would create it and then dry run it until everybody knew exactly what would happen if the person in front of you went down or the person behind you went down or I went down, who's covering that sector of fire. They really covered all of their angles, so to speak, because of that planning. And so you mentioned that the number one place that salespeople inject hope into the process of discovering value was before the sales meeting. Or before they even have that interaction. Because like you mentioned, hey, I don't know what that person's actually driving to. And that's an assumption that I know a lot of salespeople make when they get on the phone. They think they know what the outcome that person wants is. And they might have a general idea, but I coach salespeople on this all the time. I say, until you hear it out of that person's mouth, you really only are guessing. You're hoping that the last person that had a similar job title is going to have the same challenges as this person, same P&L concerns, same numbers they need to meet, same quota and all of that. So if we're dealing with getting ready for the sales meeting, because I want to put myself and all the people listening to this show in the top 95% of sales, or in the top 5%, I guess, right, of all salespeople, and 95% of that segment you mentioned plans for their calls. So what are the things that I need to keep in mind as I'm planning for my interaction with a prospect? Maybe I've had interactions with them. I'm getting back on the horn after 6 months, but I'm not sure what value means to them. What are the things I have to start keeping in mind?
One thing I would encourage you to do, and this is just about mental preparation. You and I have had conversations just how important the attitudinal side of selling is and getting your head right before you go in there. And one thing I encourage sellers to do before they walk into that meeting is to spend a few moments, and you're almost entering a meditative state. I would say, and I know it's kind of, you should see some of the, crusty old salespeople in my training. I say, I want you to enter a meditative state. They're thinking, okay, are we going to sing Kumbaya, do the trust fall next and all that? But let's say I'm making a sales call on Sean, right? Right now, I'm gonna close my eyes. I'm going to try to spend a few minutes imagining what it's like to be Sean Rhodes. What is it like to be him? What are the challenges he may be facing? What is his organization trying to achieve? What are the daily pressures he's facing? And I'm not doing that to define value in your terms. I'm just trying to put myself in a position where I can maybe get a glimpse of what you're dealing with, because that's going to help me enter the conversation focusing on you versus focusing on me. And so I would encourage sellers to do that. You don't need to take a lot of time, but spend a few minutes and just think about what it's like to be them. And then you got to ask yourself some questions. All right. Questions like, okay, what is my probing objective? Meaning what kind of open-ended questions am I going to ask this customer? What is my objective? What am I trying to achieve? What is the customer trying to achieve with this interaction? All right. Not only that, but researching their industry and just getting an understanding of what's going on. What are some of the trends that are impacting their business? Looking at their company's financials, their newsreel, trying to understand what's going on in their world. And although I said we want to have an objective, all right, this is an area where we do have to be careful, all right? And the reason why, if sometimes our objective may blind us to something bigger that could be going on within that customer and their business. And we always want to remain open-minded to that, yeah, we have a plan, but we may go in there and what the customer wants to talk about, what they want to share with us, it may be on nearly the opposite side of the spectrum on what we planned on happening. We've got to be open to that dialogue, to that free flow of information between a group, because that's where real discovery happens. And you end up getting to a spot maybe you never would have intended before, but it gives you a clear sense of what's really going on in their world.
So if we're talking about getting a hold of people, planning ahead of time, and then I love the idea of having an objective, but not being married to it if a larger opportunity shows up. So I'm just thinking to myself, like all the missions that we were running in Iraq in 2004, we might be tasked, let's go, we're going to go clear a house. So we're clearing this house and somebody notices out the window a really high value target, like somebody that's been on our list for a while that we really need to question because they've been up to some nefarious business. The house is important, But if there's a way to peel a segment of the team off to go get that target, we're not going to pass up that opportunity. And so instead of having blinders on, this is my one focus, my one mission, my one objective. On this next call, I have to get these 3 pieces of information out of my decision maker, and then, great if I can make the sale, but I'm going to hang up the phone otherwise. Well, like you said, you might start to hear something. It's like, well, I didn't even know you had that problem. And it may be something around I can help solve with my products and services, or maybe I've got someone in my network that can. Maybe it's a better fit for one of my competitors for a variety of reasons. And to be able to just be open-minded about adding value in a way that a lot of salespeople are really too driven around the numbers and the questions to be able to accomplish. And I'm Mr. Mission Objective. All right. So I'm not, sure, I'm not stepping out of that role at all, but I recognize, if I see something higher value there, in the world that you and I come from, Paul, when we're speaking at events, I'll be speaking with, a meeting planner, for instance, and we'll be talking about their annual conference. Well, I know to also ask the question, hey, do you have any other events that may be hiring speakers? And maybe they've got 4 quarterly events that also need a topic that I can speak on, or they've got other events that I wouldn't be a good fit for, but Paul, man, you'd be a shoe-in. And so if I don't ask the question, and I know this because I've tracked like 12,000 of these calls by this point, if I don't ask the question, I'm not getting that information out of it more often than not. So those follow-on questions about other ways that I might be able to help, even with my network, are incredibly important. So I'd love to build a sales system around preparing to discover value, because that's not something that we've ever been able to address here. And I want to speak to the master of value in doing it. So when we talk about building a system like this, we talk about trimming hope away from a strategy. With so many salespeople, hope they stumble on value. They hope that the person is just chatty enough to talk about the things that they're trying to achieve. And you and I know if we can structure that a little bit ahead of time, we've got a greater chance of reaching it. So the acronym TRIM, because we're going to trim hope away. The T in that for this system build that you and I are going to do today is trigger. So what is the trigger for the system of bringing this into play? Is it when I've got a conversation scheduled? Is it when I expect a call to come in because I'm doing inbound and I'm on a call center line? What do I need to do to prepare to know, hey, bring this system in of discovering value into play? What is that moment in the world of my sales cycle?
That's a great question. And as I think about it, it's got to start before even you schedule that meeting. It's almost like when you are proactively reaching out to your group of prospects. I think that has to be the trigger, because to understand your customer's definition of value, you have to give yourself an opportunity to understand it. That means schedule the meeting. Now, to schedule the meeting, you got to be able to create value from the very beginning. So I would say maybe the trigger event is that very first outreach. Are you reaching out to that prospect, to that customer with value in some way? Are you delivering some meaningful insight? Are you hinting at a problem that maybe they're having? I would say that could be the first trigger. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'd put it as well, because it's got to happen before I actually get on the phone with them. If we fail to plan for those critical moments when we only have a few seconds to capture their attention, or just get relegated to the dustbin of all the other people that have wasted their time that day, we have to be prepared when we show up. And that means, and you probably have a different perspective on this, but I want to find out as quickly as possible, is this someone that suffers from a challenge that I can solve, or is good to work with? And they may suffer from a challenge that I'm an ideal fit to solve, but they're just knuckleheads. And I know that I would have an awful time having them as a customer. It's worth passing on that business, like just, leaving it to somebody else. And so I completely agree with you before the call. So if the trigger event is when I'm getting ready to make my calls, or I'm getting ready to make that first contact with that customer or that prospect, and this could be through a variety of channels, right? Maybe my first contact is usually a phone call. Maybe it's a LinkedIn message. Maybe it's a letter I'm dropping in the mail to kind of warm them up for that phone call. A lot of different ways that I could prepare to reach out to a prospect. Triggers in place. Now, the second piece of this acronym is the R, which is making this thing repeatable. How do you advise salespeople repeat a best practice of preparing to add value to their prospects' lives? And that starts, of course, with discovering what value means to their prospect. Is it a list of questions? Is it mapping out an objective? I know that you're big on daily planning, because I've seen some of the sheets that you use. How do I make this thing repeatable so that I'm not just like hoping I remember the 4 steps that Paul mentioned before my next call?
With the repeatable piece, right? And I know, you think about having a system-focused approach. I think here the repeatable piece can happen in a few different ways. All right. And so I'm just brainstorming this right now, but I'm thinking, okay, we got to have a repeatable message. All right. And to have a repeatable message somewhat goes against the value focused approach, because the message is going to be different based on the type of customer. So maybe we can have a model, all right? A model that we can replicate that is customer focused. And what we teach sellers to do is to follow an acronym. We call it GET. So I know we got trim, and now we got, we're going to make GET as part of the repeatable part of this process. GET stands for grab their attention, establish the need, tease the customer or prospect with a benefit. So it's a basic model of how we reach out to our customers, whether we are making a cold call, whether we are sending a letter, sending an email, whatever it may be. First thing we got to do is grab their attention. All right. And we do that by either using a referral, which is the most powerful way to open up a door for a salesperson. We can do that by referencing a trigger event that they could be experiencing, a new project that they won. Second to a referral, the number one reason why decision makers, especially high-level decision makers, are willing to meet with sellers is because it appears they can solve a business problem that they currently are experiencing. And so let's say those are three ways we grab their attention. Then we establish the need for what we're offering. And we ask ourselves, okay, why is there a need right now for what I am offering this customer? What problem or pain is it going to solve? And then we tease them with the benefit. Okay, what outcome will they gain when they do experience that benefit, or we're able to solve that problem? And that 3 to 4 sentence message, whether it's over the phone or whether it's an email, that could be a repeatable framework that we use. The other thing I'm thinking is have a clear profile of what is good business for your company. I'm amazed at how often companies I work with, they just flat out don't know who their ideal customer really is. And
they're just throwing darts at the wall.
Throwing darts at the wall. And having not only that, but also having a profile of business that you want to avoid. All right. I call those the siren profile. I remember the sirens from Greek mythology. They would lure people in, they tempt you in because they look great, they sound great, but then your ship crashes into the cliff.
You're stuck there. Yeah.
And if you're lucky, most of them would die in Greek mythology, right? But that, thankfully we don't have that problem. But having a profile is critical. That's something that is repeatable as well. And the last one,
teasing. Yeah.
Oh man, I had another idea, but I'm having a brain lapse here for a moment. Having the profile, having the message, and then I think having a pre-call planning process. That's a list of maybe 6 to 7 questions, questions you're going to ask. Get a list of 10 questions that help you qualify further, uncover needs, and generate dialogue.
And with those questions, we often find that, let's say we have those 6 to 7 questions. I can usually tell where someone is in a pipeline if a salesperson is using a series of questions like that by how many questions they've gotten answered, right? So if I can get the answer to all 7 questions, that person is qualified and they're probably pretty far down the pipeline because I know what their exact challenges are. Maybe one of those questions, and it may not be asked directly like, hey, how, Mr. or Miss Prospect, how do you define value? But it's, what is the value this person is really looking for right now? And that's a question that I piece together with answers from maybe, a couple of other areas. But that's a great way to be able to define it and to carry that through so that every conversation I have with that prospect through the rest of my sales cycle, I'm looking at the value that that person is looking to gain. And I'm making sure that any question I ask drives to that. Anything that I send over as a resource, chapter from a book, article that I found, whatever that looks like, drives to that value that I know that prospect is trying to get. So we've got the trigger, we've got making it repeatable. And I love that GET acronym because, acronyms are easy for me to remember and map out. Well, the next piece of this, after we've gotten this thing repeatable, is to make it improvable. So how do I take something like a pre-call process and make sure that it's not remaining static for 10, 15 years? Because you and I know what worked in 1985 probably wouldn't play the same way today on a sales call or a Zoom meeting. So how do I make sure that I'm taking the time to improve this? And how do I improve how I discover value?
Yeah, gosh, improving on the process. It's funny you mentioned that, all right? Because as a speaker, I know you've got your list of questions you will go through with clients before an engagement. I was going through some the other day, and I said, okay, I'm missing a few questions here based on how content evolves and how things change. So I added a few more questions. Now, the reason I did that is because during the event, I thought to myself, man, I wish I would have known that
Yeah.
before. And you know that feeling we get. The key is when you have that feeling, you take action to make sure that it doesn't happen again. You think about your experience in the military during some of your training exercises when you're preparing. If something would happen that you didn't prepare for, what are you going to do? You're going to prepare for it next time around. So
Yeah.
I would say part of the process has to be almost the I piece, again, improvable, having a structured post-call debrief, where you ask yourself, okay, how was the exchange between me and this buyer? What objections did I experience that I was not prepared for? It's basically going back and saying, okay, how did I fail? How can I get better next time and make that part of it? I guess that's what I'm thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's something that we actually devoted a whole chapter to in Bulletproof Selling, how to debrief a sales meeting. And a sales meeting could be, where a proposal was generated, or it could just be, I got the decision maker on the phone, and like you said, to take the time afterwards to ask, what do I wish I would have known walking into that? And I wasn't able to ask that question, but if I could rewind time, I'd make sure I asked that question. Let's capture that question and figure out, does it need to modify one of our existing discovery questions? Does it need to replace one of them? So there's a lot of great ways to be able to make that improvable if we take the time after our meetings to ask the question, hey, did I discover value at a deep enough level so that this person is going to want to be engaged with me because I was able to get down to the heart of what they're really trying to achieve in their business or their personal lives? So that's a great way to make it improvable. Now, the final piece of this, and this is going to be interesting because value is kind of a soft topic, but the M in the TRIM acronym is measurable. How do I know that I'm discovering the right kind of value out of the prospect conversations I'm having to shorten my sales cycle and be able to provide better business and, of course, more referrals at the tail end? Because I know people that provide tons of value to me in a client relationship. I just want to throw business at them because I had such a great experience. You have to use this person. So how do I measure how well this system is working and discovering value?
Yeah, what a great question. And I think one of my favorite value-added selling strategies. I know you're not supposed to pick your favorites and all that, but there's 11 in total. One of them is what we call a defensive selling strategy. It's called value reinforcement. All right, value reinforcement is about putting on paper or dollarizing the value that you deliver. And you can do this in several ways. When it comes to measuring, one of my favorite examples, this is from a client of mine, they require their salespeople to go out there and generate $1 million worth of value-added impact on their client's business every single quarter. All right. Now, let me give you a little context to explain how they do it. All right. They're selling in the fastener industry. All right. And they're going to meet with a client, they're engineers. And part of what they'll do, which is common in this industry, is they'll look for ways to engineer so that you're using less of a product or a different product, or it's going to help save time, labor, whatever it may be. They will generate a report that they've created. It's painstaking to go through and create it, but they generate it, they present it to their customers, and then they have the customer sign off on the number that they came up with. For example, I go in to present to Sean, and I say, Sean, here's a summary of the business over the past, 6 months. Here's where you're at. Here's where we currently are. We crunched some numbers. Let me know what you think of how we calculated the numbers. And if you're in agreement with us, we just need you to sign off on it. All right. Getting that signature is proof positive that you created that value. That's something that is measurable from the client's perspective. So that's an example. Even getting a customer to write a testimonial, I believe that's part of how you can measure the value that you've delivered. And you could measure this maybe internally and say, okay, let's think about this. I have a 90% success rate of asking for customer referrals and testimonials, meaning 90% of the people I ask are thrilled to provide a testimonial. I think that speaks to your level of value that you're creating. You know, gosh, there's so many ways we could go and measure this. I think measuring the profit impact that you can have on a customer's business, where they were at before, where they were at afterwards, customer satisfaction survey results, net promoter scores. You know, I think it's just a product of asking the customer, hey, what do you think about us? But doing so with metrics, things that you can measure in there.
And those
I hope
metrics
that's where we're going with that.
yeah, absolutely. Those metrics are customer based. And
Yep.
this is interesting because a lot of times when we talk about the impact of sales systems and measuring them, we talk about, hey, did it actually increase sales? So,
Mhm.
I'm Sean Rhodes, the salesperson. I implemented this system. And the question is, hey, was it worth my time? Because the number I'm being held accountable to is sales
Mhm.
throughput. But what all of the examples you just gave me, they weren't salesperson focused. They were customer focused.
Right.
What's the impact this had to the customer's company, to their numbers, to their organization? So it's
Yeah.
very, this is great because we started with this alignment of, Sean, too many salespeople are focused on themselves rather than the customer. It's interesting to see you carry that all the way through to measurement. What's the impact I had on my customer's organization? And through that, I know the lagging indicator will be more referrals, more business, more follow-on
Yeah.
business. So a great way to measure it. And I love the fact that you made it customer centric. So I want to make sure
Mhm.
people have time to go out there and implement this. Paul, you're very active on LinkedIn, but tell people, how do we find out more about you, about value-added selling? Where do we get all of the stuff that gets us into your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So, value-added selling, it's been a staple in the sales world for a number of decades. If you Google value-added selling, you can find out everything you want to know about it. It's available on Amazon and all that. If it's all right, man, I'd love to just share a little bit about my new book coming out. It's called
Please.
Selling Through Tough Times. And the website for that is actually toughtimer.com. And an offer for all of your fans out there. There's actually 3 chapters you can download when you go visit the website. All you need to do is go to the book page at the top, and that's available. But yeah, no, other resources. I mean, we're a training company, so we're working with sales organizations throughout the world, helping them sell more profitably. That's the training arm of the business, and that's available. More information at tomreillytraining.com, who's named after the founder of our company. Happens to be my old man, so we have a loose connection there. But more details on our training is available there.
Outstanding, sir. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Great sales system. Being able to define something as ephemeral as value and build a system to be able to discover it and make sure that it's used throughout the sales process. I know that's going to help a lot of salespeople. So for us here at Bulletproof Selling, make sure that you're following us on LinkedIn, YouTube for these live streams. If you'd like to get access to all of them, they're all posted up on our Bulletproof Selling channel. And of course, check out this podcast that Paul is going to now be a part of on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, actually all of the podcast platforms now, come to find out. So for more sales systems, just like the one that we built today to help you replace hope with certainty, check out the free resources over at bulletproof-selling.com. Well, Sean Rhodes here. It's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, Paul, once again. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.